6 Reasons Why People Lack Common Sense. Do you know anyone who appears to be devoid of common sense? It's safe to guess that you, like everyone else on the globe, have had feelings like this about someone at some point. We all lack common sense to some extent, even if we aren't aware of it or willing to admit it. We may find it difficult to accept this in ourselves because a person's lack of common sense can manifest itself in a variety of ways. It's difficult to describe common sense properly, but here's a start. The activity that the majority of people believe is the most acceptable and or most likely to produce the best result is known as common sense. When people think of common sense, it's crucial to remember that the action taken is more likely to be remembered than the outcome. Even if they get at the same conclusion, you may detect a lack of common sense if you observe someone going about things differently than you would, even if they arrive at the same conclusion. Let's look at some of the reasons why someone can be thought to be weak in common sense now that we've defined it. Most people consider someone with good book smarts to be bright, but there are 9 categories of intelligence, and no one can master all of them. The hand-eye coordination required to play tennis may be lacking in the traditional bright individual with a stellar academic record and a store of knowledge and facts in their head. Alternatively, a person who excels in tennis and reading maps may be prone to saying hurtful things to others due to a lack of emotional reasoning and empathy. This is most likely why we think so many people lack common sense, they simply succeed at other areas than we do. Despite the fact that we are blind to the ways in which we, too, may be perceived as lacking in common sense, we continue to do so. Some people are simply better than others at examining and accounting for the enormous array of choices when deciding on the best approach to do anything. For example, leaving a boiling hot drink on the low coffee table when young children are playing and running around is not at all prudent, yet some people simply do not consider the possibility of a tragic catastrophe. It's also common sense to argue that eating a diet high in unhealthy takeout and fast food will have long-term health implications, but some individuals do it nevertheless. Of all, there are situations when the best course of action is a personal decision. Others may perceive them as lacking common sense as a result of their intoxicated behavior and hangovers, as well as the long-term consequences of not saving any of their discretionary income. So it's not necessarily a question of being oblivious to the consequences of our acts, but of viewing them through the eyes of someone else. We often realize that common sense dictates that we do one thing, but we nonetheless do the opposite. Meanwhile, we warn others against doing exactly what we're doing since we know it's not in their best interests. We simply cannot act in what most people believe to be the best manner all of the time. While we all lack common sense at times, some of us do so more frequently than others. If a person continues to believe or act in a certain way despite evidence that suggests they should think or act otherwise, they may be called lacking in common sense. A person who is set in their ways, on the other hand, may dismiss others as lacking in common sense because they are unable to comprehend new methods of doing things or new ideas. There are instances when being selfish is beneficial, but there are many more times when it makes a person appear as though they lack common sense. Remember that common sense is defined as behavior that is acceptable to the majority of people. People on a train carriage may turn a blind eye to a pregnant woman who has just boarded because they do not want to give up their seat, despite the fact that most people would consider it conventional sense and right thing to do. Then there are topics like climate change, where even those who recognize that changing their habits to decrease their environmental impact is the common sense thing to do find it difficult to do so since A, it's tough and B, other people aren't doing it. What about the drunk driver who puts other people's lives at jeopardy because it's easier than arranging alternative transportation home, or not drinking? None of these things make any logic, and yet they all happen on a regular basis. What one individual considers common sense may appear illogical to another. It could be a case of two people with conflicting personality types. In the eyes of someone who meticulously arranges their holidays down to an hour-by-hour itinerary, that free spirit may appear to be devoid of common sense. They regard it as basic sense to make the most of the time they have at their disposal. Another individual may see reading a book or watching a show as common sense, knowing that they are not compensated for any additional work they perform. So, you see, in the perspective of some individuals, we all lack common sense at times. So maybe it's time to stop condemning people when they do something that perplexes or annoys you, and instead recognize that you, too, can be a complete moron at times.